topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, hello and welcome. I'm Bill Martinez, and we are live. Good to have you with us. We're going to be talking about the biased media coverage on crime with my good friend, Dr. John Lott, the president of the Crime Prevention Center and author of Gun Control Myths, who says that almost 80% of Americans, 92% of Republicans think crime has gone up, and actually it fell in 2023. Dr. John Lott, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us, sir.
Great to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, whether it's the biased media coverage in cabal with the administration, and forget about what our Constitution says, it seems that they are both involved in shredding our Constitution and leaving us vulnerable. Because let's just deal with the facts and the reality of it. And again, sure. John, as a key researcher on this issue, you've got the facts to bear against their perceptions.
Right. Well, I mean, murder is higher now than it was in 2019, right before the pandemic went into effect. Uh-huh. And of course, it spiked even higher during 2020 and 2021. And it's not difficult to understand why that happened. I mean, you had judges in many parts of the country releasing half or even 2/3 of the inmates from local jails. You had district attorneys, and still have district attorneys in many places, who are refusing to prosecute violent criminals. You have police department budgets that were cut in 2020, though recently some places have, from Austin to Los Angeles to other places, have reversed the cuts that they had made. And you have things like bail reform going on in the country. So it's not particularly surprising if you make it less risky for criminals to go and commit crime. You're going to have more crime that's going to be occurring.
Exactly. Well, not to mention you got an open border that has become so dangerous that even the FBI director has the country on red alert. He says that all the lights are lit up right now when it comes to danger in our country.
Right. Well, I mean, since Biden became president, we've had over 10 million illegal aliens enter in the country, and that's just adding up to parts of the numbers there. The fact that you have people that got turned in that the Border Patrol is dealing with, and then you have so-called gotaways, which they see coming across the border, but they weren't able to catch. But it doesn't include, that 10 million doesn't even include a third category, and that is illegal aliens that we never caught and didn't see coming across. And God only knows how many of those that are there. And many of those may be among the very worst that you have to worry about. The ones that come in and turn themselves in are probably not ones you need to worry about. But one of the things that's interesting, there was a recent Harvard Harris poll that came out that asked Americans, how many illegal aliens do you think have come across in the last year? And it's just unbelievable. You have something like 50% of Democrats, for example, think that it's either less than 100,000 or less than 250,000. I mean, one could
in the
wish,
whole year.
Yeah, and one could wish that it was so few that had come across. I mean, you only have literally maybe 10% that are talking about a couple million or more. Exactly. And unfortunately, Republicans are also way, way, way low. Not quite as low as the Democrats are, but you have again, you have something like over 30% of Republicans think that almost 40% actually. Who think that less than 250,000 illegal aliens have come in. And so I mean, one could only imagine if you had all those Democrats and all those Republicans and independents who think that, less than 250,000 have come in. If you
Mhm.
told them that the true number was, uh, 20 times or whatever higher than
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
then what would their reaction be?
Well, I think it's incredulous to them because they've been told the border is secure. Mayorkas has maintained that line. Joe Biden has maintained that line. The media has, just like everything else that we're going to be talking about, the biased media is on the Democratic Party agenda, and so they support the narrative. It's amazing to me because there has been publicity about cities like New York, for example, and all it
Right,
takes is normally at this time of year, especially, New York City is flooded with with visitors, and
right,
it's going to take them 2 seconds to figure out what the heck is going on here. First of all, they're hard pressed to find a hotel room, and they're all booked up, but they're not booked up with regular patrons that are paying
right.
the it's with illegal migrants that Joe Biden has placed in these hotels.
Right. Well, one of the things that's interesting is just uh, these polls show that Biden's approval rating for things like how he's handling the border crisis
Mhm.
is in the 20% range, which is
Right.
like unbelievably low. So if it's
Yeah.
in the
How do you square up
20%
those
range,
numbers, John? Yeah,
right,
exactly.
right. Well, if it's in the 20% range and it's people think that you're talking about 250,000 or 100,000 or less that have been there,
Yeah.
one can only imagine, would it be in single digits if people knew that the correct number was like 20 times higher than that? I mean, what would it be?
Mhm.
So, so one can only imagine. And of course, as you mentioned, the mainstream media, except for covering how the Democratic mayors in places like New York City and Chicago have been,
Mhm.
or DC have been complaining about a few busloads of illegals showing up in
Mhm.
their cities. I mean, compared to the flood in
Right.
Texas, it's completely insignificant. I mean, you have Eagle Pass, Texas, which has a population of like 30,000 people, has 10,000 illegal immigrants just camping out
Oh,
in their
yeah.
city. And,
Right.
uh, New York City
Mhm.
has what, 8.5 million, something like that, and you have they're upset that they have 100,000 or so that they're
Right.
having to deal with. And
Exactly.
so, as a percentage of their population, it's trivial
Mhm.
compared to what communities from San Antonio and uh, Eagle Pass and El Paso and other places are having to deal with.
Yeah, it's just it's so overwhelming, and the other thing that is not happening, and that is the reporting by the mainstream media of illegals who are murdering America's citizens.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, obviously, there are a lot of them who aren't criminals, but
Mm,
presumably you want to go and identify which ones are criminals and which ones not
mm,
in any
mhm.
normal immigration policy that you're going to have.
Right,
And there's really no controls. And they go and ask people what their name is or whatever, but people could be making up names, and there's no way to check people coming in from a number of different countries, and they don't even try checking them.
right.
Even people that have been on the terror watch list have been released into the country. And
Mm,
when Biden administration officials have testified before Congress, and members of Congress have asked them what's happened to the terror watch list people
mhm.
that they've released and where are they? They can't tell you
Yeah,
where they are.
exactly. Mm. Yeah, no, there's danger all around here, and meanwhile, they continue to stonewall and lie to the American people about the situation, and And meanwhile, the other thing is that's going on, John. These migrants, they come across, they're beholden to cartels. See, even Mayorkas doesn't even understand why they're wearing wristbands. The wristbands is an indication as to what part of the cartel machinery within the United States, what their job will be. From human trafficking, sex trafficking, uh, uh, fentanyl, drug, you name it, all down the line. That the cartels have had a windfall. I think last year was something like $13 billion. This year we haven't hit the register total button yet, but it's going to be at least that plus tax and license and inflation on top of it.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, the cartel, in many different ways, has benefited a lot from having these open borders. But it's not
Right.
just the cartels. You have many smaller operations. I mean, when you have very strict enforcement of the border, it's
Mhm.
basically only the large cartels that are very successful in getting large amounts of drugs into the United States. But
Right.
now you have many other players that are becoming enriched, and
Mhm.
it's going to be hard to put the genie back in the bottle there with all the money
Mhm.
that these organizations are obtaining.
But John, see, this is just going to add to the crime rate even more so, don't you think? I mean, not to mention, we haven't even touched on this, and this is the psychological impact on everyday citizens here. You've got people that, are still buying guns and they're, stocking up ammunition because danger just seems so imminent.
Right. Well, I mean, there are lots of different causes for that. I was just reading an article earlier today about how Jews in Los Angeles and, of
Mhm.
course, other places in the country are going out and buying guns. Uh, but I think what's happening is people are beginning to wake up and understand that, look, uh, if the government's not able to protect you, and the government and the police, while they're extremely important in
Mhm.
reducing crime, the
Right.
police themselves understand that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crimes occurred. And the question is,
Exactly.
what should people do when they're having to confront a criminal by themselves? And it turns out that by far the safest course of action is to have a gun. And that's particularly true, I
Mhm.
would argue, for the most vulnerable people in our society, people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly.
Mhm.
You're almost always talking about young men doing the violent crime, the attack there. And when a
Right.
man is attacking a woman, there's a much larger strength difference that exists there than when a man is attacking another man. And
Right.
the other group of people who benefit the most are the ones who are the most likely victims of violent crime, and that overwhelmingly tends to be poor blacks
Mhm.
who live in high crime urban areas. You know, so we're in this weird world that you and I have talked about before, where Democrats have made it difficult for uh, law enforcement to do its job in many areas. And at the same time, they want to make it difficult for people to be able to go and protect themselves. And so the question is, what's the alternative? I mean, it's just
Exactly.
everything you can do to make it easier for criminals to go and commit crime. And
Mhm.
and the thing is, this isn't rocket science. If you make it less risky for people to go and commit crime, they're going to go and commit more crime. And it's not just the direct victims of violent crime that are harmed from that. What you have is many indirect ways. So it's,
Mhm.
obviously family members of crime victims, but uh, people tend to commit crimes in areas where they live nearby against similar people. And so
Exactly.
about 90% of murders of blacks are committed by blacks. And so,
Mhm.
you know, y- uh, Democrats may be concerned about equity in terms of making sure that people go to prison at the same rate for each
Mhm.
group of the population there. But the victims of violent crime tend to be the same types of people, poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas. But it's not just that, it's who
Mhm.
owns many of the stores that close down or pay the higher prices in those stores, who works in those stores, who lives in those communities,
Mhm.
whose property values are depressed because of the higher crime rates that occur. All
Exactly.
those, Democrats claim that they care about the poor, that they care about blacks, that they care about women, and yet the types of policies that they go and push, those are the victims.
Mhm. Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. We're talking with Dr. John Lott, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center and the author of Gun Control Myths. John, we've got the graphs that you had produced regarding biased media coverage on crime. Almost 80% of Americans, 92% of Republicans think crime has gone up. It actually fell, you say, in 2023. And I want to pull up the first graph that shows the FBI murder rate, if you can explain that to our audience.
Right. Well, obviously, there was a big increase in murder rates in 2020 and 2021. There was some decline in 2022, and there was an additional decline in 2023, but it's still above what it was before the pandemic. So the
Mhm.
media is out there talking about the big drop. What they seem to ignore was that there was an even larger increase that had occurred in 2020,
Mhm.
and the thing is, uh, there's there are issues with the new FBI data for
Right.
murder compared to
Right.
what it was in 2019, because
Mhm.
in the last couple years, a lot of big cities where a lot of the murders have been occurring haven't
Mhm.
been reporting their data to the FBI, and so there's some other people that have tried to collect the data. I mean, cities like Los Angeles and New York didn't report their crime data last year to the FBI. Now they still have it. You can go
Right.
and look
Right.
on the city websites and you can go and find it. It just wasn't reported to the FBI. And so there are people out there that have gone and collected the data that these cities are putting out there, even if the FBI isn't getting it.
Uh-huh.
And it looks like uh, there was a smaller drop in 2023 if you use this other data than the FBI data. In fact, if you make a comparison between 2023 and 2019, the murder rate was still over 7% higher using that data in
Mhm.
2023 than it was in 2019.
Well, John, I mean, has to drive you nuts as a researcher because you're sitting there, you're thinking you can rely on the FBI, and and they seem to be very casual about this because then what happens is people will quote these numbers
Right.
because that's why they do this research. So they can help justify their agenda, right?
Well, unfortunately, I think the FBI, I mean, I've used FBI crime data for 40 years now,
Mhm.
and uh, I've never felt the way I do these days about their data. I mean, part of it is the fact that I worked at the US Department of Justice
Mhm.
in 2019 and 2020. And I guess I've gotten to the point where I'm skeptical of a lot of different types of data that the FBI puts out.
Right.
Unfortunately, I think there have been political biases and other things that have been there. Things like hate crime data, where you have subjective calls about whether to classify something as a hate crime or not.
Mhm.
I think that there are real problems with. I think there's real problems with their active shooting reports that get a lot of media attention. Uh, and I think, unfortunately, even if it's not as obvious political bias that's there, I think
Mhm.
there have been problems with the crime data over the last couple of years too.
Mhm.
And you know,
And
so
John, when you go to report on this and point out the discrepancy, I mean, my goodness, I would think that they would want to listen to you because you're a researcher. I mean, you're looking at numbers, you're processing data, you're on top of it, not some staffer associated with some, congressman or congresswoman or senator. You probably have forgotten more than they'll ever learn. And instead, when you lay the facts out out to they're challenging you, and it's
right,
sometimes I have to laugh, and I'm going, these are the numbers. How can you
right.
refute the numbers, right?
Well, I worked in the federal government in the 1980s. I was chief economist for the U.S. Sentencing Commission, and
Uh,
more recently, I was senior advisor for research and statistics in the U.S. Department of Justice. And I have to say, in the 1980s, when you'd go and point out errors in the data,
mhm.
people would fix them.
Yes.
Uh, that wasn't the case in 2019 and 2020 when I was working there. When you go and point out errors, people would either not respond or they would, even if you could get people to concede that there were errors there, they would refuse to fix them. Things that I pointed out, they still haven't fixed, even
Yeah.
years later now. And, something like the active shooting reports where police departments don't collect that data and you have to go and, they'll hire people to go and look at news stories to collect those. I can understand why people can miss
Mhm.
finding all the news stories, even if they spend millions of dollars on something like that. But it's one thing to miss it to begin with. It's another thing not to fix it when somebody points out to you news stories that you've
Yeah.
missed. And unfortunately, I think in that case, it's pretty clear that they have a
Mhm.
political agenda there
Well, yeah,
because the cases that they miss are systematically
right.
cases where people use guns to stop what would have been active shooting cases. And anyway.
Well, but it seems to be, a disease within the bureaucracy, stemming from that old concept of it's good enough for government work. So whether you're counting votes or registering voters, so what if you got 3 million dead people on the rolls? Not that big a deal. See, so this casual attitude, it permeates every aspect of of the institutions. And so then when we go to have a fair-minded debate and discussion because we want to fix the problem, your data is compromised. Well, if your data is compromised, uh, I got to believe that's going to have an effect on the solution, is it not, John?
Well, I don't know how you can even know whether there's a problem to fix unless you go and look at the data that's there.
Right.
People have to rely on it, and then how you're going to fix it's going to be depending upon, how you measure the problem and what you
Mhm.
think the different solutions are. And the
Right.
only way you can even test different solutions and look at different places that have tried different ways of fixing things is by
Mhm.
seeing how the data changes after they've changed their policies.
Right.
So but it's it's not just sloppiness or laziness. I mean, it may be sometimes that that's the
Mhm.
case, and that's, probably the simplest explanation to go and point to. But, when you're talking about something like the active shooting reports
Mhm.
where, people have pointed out I've pointed out that they've missed news stories. People Nobody needs to believe me about these things. You can go to our website at crimeresearch.org
Mhm.
and if you go and you click on the links at the top for our recent research there, you'll quickly find our reports on active shooting cases.
Exactly.
And
Mhm.
and nobody needs to take my word for it. We have the cases that the FBI has listed. We have uh, like 150 cases that we say that they've missed over the 9 years
Mhm.
from 2014 through 2022, cases where guns were used to stop these active shooting cases. And so there are two things. One is it's one
Mhm.
thing to miss cases, but it seems very systematic because the cases that they've missed are all cases where people use guns to stop attacks.
Exactly.
Um,
Mhm.
they also misclassified things. You have something like the white settlement church shooting near Fort Worth, Texas,
Mhm.
in December 2019. Uh, in that situation, they classified the individual who stopped the attack as a security guard. So they didn't chalk it up as a civilian stopping the attack.
Right.
Well, when I was at the Department of Justice, I called up the man who stopped the attack. He said, maybe they gave people the title of honorary security guard, but
Right.
basically the minister there had said anybody who has a concealed carry permit just carry, and we'll just call you an honorary security guard. There's no
Right.
additional training. There's no
Mhm.
uh, fees that they were paid. There was no anything. It's just you were a parishioner. You had a
Right.
concealed carry permit. You were welcome to do it. In fact, on the day that the attack occurred, they can't even tell you how many permit holders were there. They think it's someplace between like 18 and 20,
Mhm.
and it's because the church wasn't taking, keeping track
Right.
of who was carrying or who wasn't. It was just anybody who had a permit was able to carry there.
Yeah.
And
But on a
so,
national average, John, isn't it about 15% of the country has a concealed carry permit, roughly?
well, about 8% of adults in the
Mhm.
United States have a concealed carry permit. If you remove California and New York from the totals, you're talking about something about 10.5%.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but now there are like these 27 constitutional carry states where you don't
Exactly.
need to have a permit. We've recently put out our report on this, our annual
Mhm.
report,
Right.
and we hired McLaughlin and Associates to go and do a survey of whether people carry. And what we found was that about 15.6% of adults voters, general election voters in the United States, said that they carried concealed handguns for protection, and that's quite a significant increase from
Mhm.
a Pew survey that was done about 5 years ago. And so, um, you know, you have a situation where it's pretty clear that you can explain the number of people who carry based on the costs. I'll give you a simple example.
Okay.
Compare Illinois and Indiana. In Indiana, about 23% of the adult population has a concealed carry permit. In Illinois, it's about 4%. Why the difference? Well, in Illinois, if you add up the cost of the fees and the training and what have you, you're talking about something that's like $450 to go
Yes.
and get a concealed carry permit.
Mhm.
In Indiana, it's literally $0. They don't even charge you for doing the background check there. So you
Wow.
make it more costly, you get fewer people who are going to be doing it. It's not, just simple economics there.
Yeah.
But it's more than that because it not only affects the number of people who carry, but it affects the mix of people who carry. So
Mhm.
in Illinois, it's basically wealthy people who live in the suburbs
Yeah.
who are carrying concealed handgun permits. In Indiana, you see a lot more people with permits in urban, heavily minority, poor areas. And, just
Right.
so if you want to reduce crime, you have to make it risky for criminals to commit crime. The greater the
Mhm.
percentage of people carrying, the greater the reduction, but it matters who's carrying. I can have
Exactly.
100% of the population carrying, but if it's
Mhm.
in an area where there's no crime, I'm not going to get any reduction in
Mhm.
crime. I
Right.
have to have
Exactly.
them carrying in the high crime areas. And so
Mhm.
in Illinois, you're going to get a much smaller reduction in crime because you have fewer people carry. But I think even more important, the people who are carrying in areas where there's not a lot of crime.
Yeah.
In Indiana, not only do you have a lot more people carrying, but you have the people who are the most likely victims carrying. And
Right.
so you're making it riskier, much riskier for criminals to attack people in Indiana than you are in Illinois.
Yeah, well, and the other thing too, in terms of like a bell curve shape here, John, I would think would exist is that yes, in these areas where these wealthier areas and they're able to afford the costs of a gun and all the licensing and everything like that.
Right.
I can imagine in the poor areas, that's where you've got people that have guns, but they don't care about no stinking law. They're just going to carry the gun because because they're criminals.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the problem. Uh, you go and you pass these laws, and as something you and I have talked about many times,
Mhm.
you have to be careful that the law doesn't primarily disarm law-abiding good citizens. So take something simple like these gun-free zones that you have.
Oh, you're
Um,
driving. Yeah.
it, right, you and I have talked about this, and it's something that really upsets me. talk about media bias. The media
Yeah.
just absolutely refuses to go and cover what these murderers say in their manifestos and
Exactly.
diaries about why they picked the targets that they did. Over and over again, they explain that they want to commit suicide, but they want to go to a place where they can kill lots of people because they want to get media coverage. And they know that the more people they kill, the more media coverage that they're going to get. And if they go to a place where their victims are not able to defend themselves, they're going to be able to go and kill more people and get more media coverage. But the thing is, take something like the Nashville school shooting earlier this year.
Exactly. Right.
You have, if you or I carried a gun into a school zone, we'd be facing 6 years in prison. Well, 6 years in prison, your life, my life would be completely changed as a
Mhm.
result of that.
Right.
But let's say you're the murderer there who murdered 6 people, and assuming that they had lived, okay, they died at the scene, but is often the case. But let's say that
Mhm.
they had lived, they'd be facing 6 life sentences or 6 death penalties.
Right.
Would an additional 6 years matter to them? You're saying, "Well, you're gonna take 6 years from their 7th life there,
Right.
that's gonna stop them. They're gonna be
Mhm.
concerned about that." I mean, it's ridiculous.
Right.
It represents no real additional penalty for those individuals,
Mhm.
okay, compared to, a law-abiding citizen there whose life would be completely demolished if they did. So what does the law do? I understand the desire behind the law. I understand the desire is to create a safe area, but what happens is the opposite,
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
because the murderer there knows that the victims will be defenseless because it represents a big penalty for them if they were to go and have a gun.
Mhm.
But the murderer takes advantage of that. The murderer talks about that in their diaries and
Right.
manifestos, saying, they know
Mhm.
that their victims are going to be defenseless, and that will allow them to kill more people and therefore get more media coverage. And so
Well, yeah.
these gun-free zones actually serve as a magnet for people to
Exactly.
go and do these attacks.
Just put a target all over these gun-free zones. That's why I told you the story here in Florida when I went to a theater and they had signs all over the front of the building. This is a gun-free zone. I went to the manager. I said, "Do you realize what you're doing with that?"
Right.
Well, it's company Well, no, you've just put a crosshair, a target on every one of the patrons here.
Right.
Needless to say, I ignored their stinking sign. I'm not going to be in that kind of situation, and now I just altogether I just don't go to that theater because it's just
Right.
absolutely stupid that they would do that. And then speaking of manifestos, we still haven't got the full manifesto from what happened in Nashville. A little bit leaked out,
Right.
but
3
to your point,
pages.
yeah, but to your point, uh, you know, uh, she decided not to. I mean, the reason she picked that one school was because she knew that there wasn't anybody there that was going to fire back at her. The other school that she had picked, she
Oh, it's
realized
a
that
mall.
a
Yeah,
mall
it's a
rather,
mall.
yeah,
Right. Exactly.
she was going to have a
Yeah, no,
problem.
right. No, it's exactly. I mean, the Nashville police chief, who did get a look at the diary there,
Mm,
made the exact point that you're making. He said that the murderer's original primary target had been a nearby mall there, but that they had looked into it and realized that people had guns,
yeah,
concealed handguns, and would be there to stop them. And so the murderer there, therefore picked the school for precisely the reason that you say, that they
mm,
knew that there wasn't going to be anybody there to go and stop them.
right. Well, John, at your website, you evaluate you read you collected the data that evaluated President Biden in handling crime and law enforcement issues. I want to bring that graph up now. This is a national survey of 892 U.S. likely voters. It was conducted between December 6 and 7, and this was just this year,
Right.
December 6th and 7th, and the 10th of 2023. And Rasmussen reported the following. So go ahead and explain to our audience how that came out.
Right. Well, you know, uh, Americans, even people who are, considered Democratic supporters, are pretty much down on how well Biden has been doing with regard to crime. Some of the things that I find particularly interesting is that the people who are most upset are basically poor people,
Mhm.
people with relatively low educations, the people that you think are most likely victims of violent crime. The people who don't aren't as upset are people who are graduate school education, people who make like over $200,000 a year, and so you have a group of people that are kind of isolated from the problems that they're creating for others. They live in their
Exactly.
safe communities and what have you.
Mhm.
But the people who actually have to live with the outcomes from these solutions are the ones who are most concerned about the problems that are there.
Mhm. Well, what do you make, John? I mean, you got DC experience. I mean, we got lawmakers that have been, cars have been, they've been
Right,
carjacked, you know.
right,
So some of this stuff is starting to come home, to these lawmakers that, that have created, yeah, I would say in a lot of ways they've created a lot of the problem.
right. Well, I mean, and you've seen some reversal, a significant reversal in things like uh, police funding.
Mhm.
Police funding had been cut uh, in a number of places, and they've reversed that. That they
But how can
realize
they
that that
recover,
has
Jo
a
but how can they recover, John? I mean, when you do this kind of damage to everyday people, I mean, these are law enforcement officers, with a lot of experience, and
right,
you put them under this kind of pressure. You have a situation like what happened with Derek Chauvin, and other things that have happened in terms of the prejudice against law enforcement. Uh,
right,
these guys are going, hey, you know what? I'm going to go in the life insurance business. I don't need to put my livelihood and my retirement on the line for people that are not going to appreciate me.
right. Well, I mean, you can hire new officers and train them. I mean, it may not happen instantly that you're going to be able to replace the people. Plus, it takes, a couple years for officers to get the experience that they need to
Exactly.
kind of be as effective as they would be. But to be honest, I think one of the reasons why uh, people in these cities, they wanted to drive out a lot of the older officers there. And one of the reasons why I think they wanted to do that is if you look at surveys of police
Mhm.
officers, you find that they tend to be extremely conservative on lots of issues, including gun
Right.
control and what have you.
Mhm.
And I think part of what was going on is that the liberals, the Democrats who were running these areas, thought that they could bring in new young officers that they could go and train with the views that they want them to have,
Mhm.
and they could get rid of the older officers.
Mhm.
And I think that may have been part of what they were thinking.
Well, John, look at, you kind of touched on this a little bit, and maybe we can unwrap this a little bit more because, your research, you're looking outside of the United States and seeing what other countries, what they've done in Europe with this. And they seem to be a little bit more objective, at least in my humble opinion. What I'm reading is that they're giving you real numbers where the kind of information that you get here in this country as evidenced by this media report, it is quite biased. What's your determination based on what you're seeing that's happening overseas versus what's happening here in America?
Well, I mean, Europe has had increases in violent crime. They've
Mm.
had a large influx of immigrants into the area there, many
Mhm.
of them illegal.
Right.
And, you know, uh, Europe, though, has better data in terms of kind of monitoring the number of people that have been coming into their countries, usually because it's at the country level.
Mhm.
Um, and has been research out there. I did something for Real Clear Investigations
Mhm.
recently that
Right.
basically the countries that have had the biggest increases in illegal immigration have had the biggest increases in murder rates.
Right.
And so you can go and do that type of study. In the United States, we don't know, it's hard enough to get data on the number that are coming into the country.
Mhm.
But to go and get it broken down at the state level is pretty much non-existent.
Exactly.
So, what you'd like to try to do is to go and to see whether those states in the U.S.,
Mhm.
which have had the biggest increases in illegal immigrants, how their crime rates have changed.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, as I say, that data is not readily available.
Well, John, what about in terms of these crimes and these murders that involve guns? I mean, because a lot of these countries, they've outlawed guns. I mean, you can't have a gun. I mean, it's concealed carry in
Well, you can't
England.
have one legally, but
Right.
right. So, okay, a couple points. One is over 92% of violent crime in the United States has nothing at all to do with guns in any way.
Mhm. Right.
Uh, I know there's so much discussion about gun crime. President Biden talks about it constantly. But, it seems to me whether somebody is assaulted or harmed with a gun or without a gun, if a woman's raped without a gun or raped with it,
Mhm.
it's pretty bad in either case.
Right.
And
Mhm.
and the way you reduce uh, gun crime generally is the same way that you go and reduce this other 92% of violent
Mhm.
crime, and
Right.
that is you make it risky for criminals to go and commit crimes. And unfortunately, President Biden, you will search in vain to find him criticizing the district attorneys that have been releasing inmates. You won't find any discussions about him about bail reform. You won't find any discussions of him criticizing liberal judges that have been releasing these large numbers of inmates, as I said earlier, in many urban areas in 2020, 2021, and even the beginning of 2022. You'd see, in some urban areas, half or even two-thirds of the inmates being released from jails there.
Mm.
So it's a
Wow.
real problem.
Yeah, here you are. You're in a sense, you're importing kind of like what we've done with our open borders. We're importing uh, in some cases, you can say hatred and evil into it, and then now all of a sudden you open up the floodgates, and you have people who already have problem issues with their criminality, and you just dumped them into a society. I mean, what is all that about? And somehow, I guess, for the sake of equity or justice as they perceive it. But this is a serious experiment, and it seems that with the Democratic Party, especially John, that they like to operate in the realm of the theoretical. Everything's on a theory with them, but the deal is after everything is all said and done, as you mentioned, you're hard pressed to get the data to say, okay, let's, we did this based on your theory, and we went into this grand
Right.
experiment. What's the results? There's no accountability on this, and so how can you determine whether or not you made the right or wrong decision and what adjustments you need to make? Meanwhile, you're leaving the citizens buck naked and exposed here.
Right. Well, look, I mean, the relationship seems pretty clear to me and to you.
Yeah.
If you want to reduce crime, you have to make it riskier for criminals to go and commit crime. Uh,
It's
but
pretty much that
it's not
simple, isn't
just
it, John? John, I mean, you've said that several times, and I hope our audience, I hope the viewers are catching this. This isn't, in a lot of ways, this is not rocket science, is it?
right. Look, Anybody who's had a dog or a child or something like that, if a dog does something wrong, you punish them. You don't reward them for doing it.
Right.
If you want the dog to stop doing it, you have to make it clear to the dog that it's not behavior that makes you happy, okay?
Right.
And that there are consequences to the dog for doing that. And
Mhm.
if the dog doesn't think that there are any consequences or thinks that they're going to be able to get away with that behavior, then you're going to have more of that undesired behavior that's going to be there. And the same thing is true with kids. I mean, maybe it's just as simple as letting the kid know that you're really disappointed in what they're doing, but it has
Mhm.
to be some type of consequence there,
Right.
or you're going to get more of that bad behavior.
Yeah, you
So
kind of
you kind of
echoed my.
wonder, maybe the liberals never had any kids, or maybe
Yeah.
they didn't know how to raise their kids or something. I have no idea. But it just,
Mhm.
it's a puzzle that people
Mhm.
don't seem to understand this view. I mean, I can't tell you the number of Soros prosecutors that I've heard make the statement that, putting people in prison or jail for going and committing crimes, doesn't have any effect on the crime rate. That they think that they can
Yeah.
cut the prison population by half or two-thirds or whatever,
Mhm.
and there won't be any consequence. One of the things that happened during the pandemic, as I say, you had these liberal judges releasing large numbers of inmates. But, the bizarre thing was, I mean, we knew pretty early on, even surely by the fall of 2020, that
Mhm.
COVID was really only a problem for people who were elderly or
Right.
who had certain comorbidities. The
Mhm.
types of people that you have in jails and prison aren't aren't that way. I mean, the
Right.
overwhelming majority of people who are in jails and prisons are, like 18, 20s, early 30s.
Right.
That's the vast majority of people who are in jail there. And
Mhm.
so and the vast majority of those are healthy physically. And so, Eh, but those were the ones who were largely being released there,
Right.
and
Mm.
it doesn't make any sense to me why, but yet, even though we knew, that those were not the people who were susceptible to this, you still had liberal judges and whatever who were still
Mhm.
willing to go and release them. They viewed it
Right.
as, unfortunately, I think more as, something that they could use as an excuse to accomplish the policy goals that they wanted to accomplish.
Well, look at the disaster of the Summer of Love. How many billions of dollars were just, vapored, businesses destroyed, jobs
Sure.
lost across the country.
Right.
It's just absolutely heartbreaking what's happened. And this was all, exacerbated by these liberal judges and prosecutors that kept doing exactly what you've cited is
Right.
they incentivized all this bad behavior. And even in California, I mean, you could smash and grab up to $1,000 without any accountability. And
Right.
I mean,
No.
it's crazy to watch this on television, John, and you say, wait a minute, this cannot be happening in America. Oh, yeah, it's happening. And that's why all these businesses are moving out of these big cities.
Yeah, no, they're closing down. You have places like San Francisco
Mm.
where you kind of wonder, what where you're going to get a Walgreens or a CVS, and even when they do have those stores, everything is locked up behind glass cases.
Exactly. Yeah.
To try to prevent people from stealing things, it's really, and of
Mhm.
course, that's more costly. It slows down how quickly you can go and buy things in a store because you have to wait for somebody to come by and
Mhm.
unlock the cabinet for you. You can't go and read the print on the package to kind of find out
Mhm.
whether it's really the type of thing that you want to get or not.
Mhm. But
Uh,
I'll tell
and
you, the
of
people
course,
that are perpetrating the smash and grab, they don't care about a label. And there
right,
isn't some little simple little lock that's gonna lock up that glass shelf that's gonna slow them down. I mean, it is so absurd on so many levels. You're exactly right. John, we gotta leave it there. As always, we appreciate, all the information and what you've shared with us, today. Remind people where they can go to stay on top and, follow the issues in this coming year.
Well, thanks, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
But people can go to our website at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org. And, at once every 2 weeks, we send out an email to let people know about the research that we've been doing.
Mm.
And, I hope people will consider signing up for that. It doesn't do us any good to do the research on these various topics. Unless, the whole point of it is to kind of educate people on them.
Exactly. And oh yeah, by the way, there's a donate button. So if you need to do something for taxes and a good place to donate, don't donate and help the cause here because of the great work that they're doing on behalf of we the people. Dr. John Lott, thank you so much. God bless you and Merry Christmas to you, buddy. Take care.
Thank you for being there, Bill. Thank you.
You got it. Dr. John Lott, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center and author of Gun Control Myths. Thank you so much for sharing a part of your day with us, for tuning in. And may God bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Thanks again. Merry Christmas. Take care.